Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 2018 Bay Area Secular Solstice. Before we get going tonight, I'd like to share a little logistical information with you. First, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. There is a dedicated room for kids here at the event. That is the Discovery Lab, which is on the main floor next to where we have all the potluck food set out. Children are welcome here in the planetarium if they can stay quiet. But if they start making a lot of noise, please take them to the kids' room. We will be projecting lyrics for some of the songs. All but one of the projected songs are sing-alongs, and they are marked that way in your program. The one exception is a song that the choir is singing in Italian, where we'll be projecting a translation of the lyrics that we're singing. There are no intermissions in tonight's program. We expect it to run about an hour and 45 minutes. And finally, in order to keep the atmosphere of the event reflective, please hold your applause until the end of the program. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
7 starry ages he has ruled the winter skies with the fires of lost eons in his eyes. He has seen the rise and fall of kings and continents and all, rising silent, bold Orion on the rise. When he ascends, no hesitation, when he moves, no turning round. Like a soul been called to glory, earthly born, heavenly bound. Now the bird is on the wing, and it's southward that she flies. Hasten on, my bold Orion on the rise. Bold Orion, mighty hunter, rising in a clear cold sky. See the summer fall before him. Bold Orion is on the rise. Summer comes on all too slowly, and it passes far too fast. Then you wonder, is there nothing that can last? Here today and gone tomorrow, as the green leaves turn to red, as the present swiftly fades into the past. Cut the wood and stack it high now, stoke the fires in your home, burning nightly send the smoke up to the sky. Keep the winter at your door and keep the summer in your heart. Drink a toast to bold Orion on the rise. Bold Orion, mighty hunter, rising in a clear cold sky. See the summer fall before him. Bold Orion is on the rise. Bold Orion, mighty hunter, rising in a clear cold sky. See the summer fall before him. Bold Orion is on the rise. Bold Orion is on the rise.
We will never know their names. The name of the first victim could not have been recorded, for there was no written language to record it. But they were someone's son or daughter, and they were someone's friend, and they were loved by those around them. And they were in pain, covered in rashes, confused and scared, not knowing why this was happening to them or what they could do, victim of a mad, inhuman God. And there was nothing to be done. Humanity was not strong enough, not aware enough, not knowledgeable enough to fight back against a monster that could not be seen. It killed in ancient Egypt, where it slew pharaoh and slave alike. In Rome, it effortlessly decimated armies. It killed in Moscow, in Syria, in India, 5 million dead. It killed more than 1,000 Europeans every day in the 18th century. It killed more than 50 million Native Americans. From the Peloponnesian War to the Civil War, it slew more soldiers and civilians than any weapon, any soldier, any army. Not that this stopped the most foolish and empty souls from attempting to harness the demon as a weapon against their own enemies. Cultures grew and faltered, and it remained. Empires rose and fell, and it thrived. Ideologies waxed and waned, but it did not care. Kill, maim, spread, an ancient mad god hidden from view that could not be fought, could not be confronted, could not even be comprehended. Not the only one of its kind, but the most devastating. For a long, long time, there was no hope, only the bitter, hollow endurance of survivors. In China, in the 10th century, humanity began to fight back. It was observed that those who had survived the mad god's curse would never be touched by it again. They had taken a portion of its power into themselves and were so protected from it. More than that, this power could be shared by consuming a remnant of their wounds. Not without a price, for one could not take the god's power without first defeating it, but it was a smaller battle on humanity's terms. This technique spread by the 16th century to India, then across Asia to the Ottoman Empire, and by the 18th century to Europe. In 1796, a more powerful protection was devised by Edward Jenner, and an idea began to take hold. Maybe the ancient god could be killed. A whisper became a voice became a call, and a call became a battle cry, sweeping across nations. Humanity began to cooperate, spreading the protective power across the globe. People who were once sworn enemies joined in common cause for this one battle. Governments mandated that all their citizens protect themselves, for to give the demon even a single life would put millions in danger. And inch by inch, humanity drove the enemy back. Fewer friends wept. Fewer neighbors were crippled. Fewer parents had to bury their children. At the dawn of the 20th century, for the very first time, the demon was banished from entire corners of the globe. Humanity faltered many times in its efforts, but there were those who never gave up, who fought for the dream of a world in which no child would ever fear the demon ever again. Viktor Zhdanov, who called for humanity to unite in a final push against its enemy. The great tactician Karol Rashka, who conceived of a strategy to annihilate it once and for all. Donald Henderson, who led the efforts in those final days. The enemy grew weaker. Millions became thousands. Thousands became dozens. And when it did strike, scores of humans poured forth to defy it, protecting anyone whom it might endanger. The enemy's last attack in the wild was on Ali Mao Ma'alin in 1977. For months afterwards, dedicated teams of humans swept the surrounding area, searching for any last desperate hiding place where the enemy might yet remain. Found none. 39 years ago today, on December 9th, 1979, humanity declared victory. This one evil, this horror from beyond memory, this monster that took 500 million lives from this world was destroyed. 500 million and not a single one more. You are a part of the species that did that. Never let yourself forget what humanity is capable of when we band together and declare war on what is broken in this world.
Imagine two principles here in poetic personification. The first is the goddess of Cancer. The second, the goddess of everything else. The first with the claws of a crab, and the second with a dress made of feathers of peacocks.
I, the goddess of Cancer, reached out a clawed hand over the mudflats and tide pools and said, "Kill, consume, multiply, conquer." Then everything burst into life, became miniature monsters engaged in a battle of all against all in their zeal to sate their insatiable longings. And the swamps became orgies of hunger and fear and grew loud with the screams of a trillion amoebas.
Then I, the goddess of everything else, trudged my way through the bog till the mud almost totally dulled my bright colors and rainbows. I stood on a rock and I sang them a dream of a different existence. I showed them the beauty of flowers. I showed them the oak tree majestic, the roar of the wind on the wings of the bird, and the swiftness and strength of the tiger. I showed them the joy of the dolphins abreast of the waves as the spray formed a rainbow around them. And all of them watched as I sang, and they all sighed with longing.
But they told her, "Alas, what you show us is terribly lovely. But we are the daughters and sons of the goddess of Cancer, and holy her creatures. The only goals in us are kill, consume, multiply, conquer. And though our hearts long for you, still we are not yours to have, and your words have no power to move us."
Then I gave a smile and spoke, saying, "I can hardly blame you for being the way you were made when your master so carefully yoked you. But I am the goddess of everything else, and my powers are devious and subtle. So I do not ask you to swerve from your monomaniacal focus on breeding and conquest. But what if I show you a way that my words are aligned with the words of your maker in spirit? For I say unto you that even multiplication itself, when pursued with devotion, will lead to my service."
And as soon as she spoke, it was so, and the single-celled creatures were freed from their warfare. They joined hands in friendship, with this one becoming an eye, and with that one becoming a neuron. Together they soared and took flight from the swamp and the muck that had birthed them, and flew to new islands, all balmy and green and just ripe for the taking. And there they consumed, and they multiplied far past the numbers of those who had stayed in the swampland. In this way, the oath of the goddess of everything else was not broken.
But I was not happy. The things I had raised from the mud had become all complacent in cooperation. So I stretched out my left hand and snapped my cruel pincer and said what I always say: "Kill, consume, multiply, conquer." I said these things not to the birds and the beasts, but to each cell within them. And many cells flocked to my call and divided. And flower and fishes alike bulged with tumors, and falcons fell out of the sky in their sickness. But others remembered the words of the goddess of everything else and held fast. So I stretched out my right hand and spoke to the birds and the beasts: "Kill, consume, multiply, conquer." They sat on each other in violence and hunger, their maws turning red with the blood of their victims. Whole species were driven to total extinction. Then I, the goddess of Cancer, declared it was good and returned to the fire.
Then I came from the waves like a siren, all flush with the sheen of the ocean. I stood on a rock, and I sang them a dream of a different existence. I showed them the beehive, all golden with honey, the anthill, all cozy and cool in the soil. I showed them the pair bond, the family, friendship. I showed these to the shorebirds in ponds full of fishes, and all of those who saw them, their hearts broke with longing.
But they told her, "Your music is lovely and pleasant, and all that you show us we cannot but yearn for. But we are the daughters and sons of the goddess of Cancer, and all that we know is the single imperative: kill, consume, multiply, conquer. Yes, once in the youth of the world you compelled us, but now things are different. We're all individuals. No further change will the goddess of Cancer allow us. So much as we love you, alas, we are not yours to have, and your words have no power to move us.
I only laughed at them, saying, "But I am the goddess of everything else, and my powers are devious and subtle. Your loyalty unto the goddess your mother is much to your credit, nor yet shall I break it. Indeed, I fulfill it. Return to your multiplication, but now, having heard me, each meal that you kill and each child that you sire will bind yourself ever the more to my service." I then dove back into the sea, and a coral reef bloomed where I vanished.
And as soon as she spoke, it was so. And all the animals joined together. The wolves joined in packs, and in schools joined the fishes. The bees had their beehives, the ants had their anthills, and even the termites built big termite towers. The finches formed flocks, and the swift swarming swallows, and even the humans put down their weapons and formed little villages, loud with the shouting of children.
When I returned from the fire, I saw that my world of pure competition had somehow been softened. I raised my left hand and said once again, "Kill, consume, multiply, conquer." I said these things not to the flocks or the tribes, but to each individual. Many, on hearing, took food from the communal pile, or stole from the weak, or accepted the presents of others, but would not give back in their turn. Each wolf at the throats of the others in hopes to be alpha, each lion holding back during the hunt, but partaking of meat that the others had killed. And the pride in the pack seemed to groan with the strain, but endured, for the works of the goddess of everything else are not ever so easily vanquished. So then I turned to the flocks and the tribes, and raised my right hand, saying, "Kill, consume, multiply, conquer." And upon one another they set, putting black ant on red ant, or chimps against gibbons. Whole tribes turned to corpses in terrible warfare. The stronger defeating the weaker, enslaving their women and children. The natural condition restored, I returned to the fire.
The night came in from the waves like a siren, all flush with the sheen of the ocean. I stood on a rock, and I sang them a dream of a different existence. Where are we? Sorry. I showed them white parchment with flowing calligraphy, pictures of flowers that wound through the margins. I showed them tall cities of bright alabaster where no one went hungry or froze in the winter. And all of the humans knelt prostrate before me and knew they would sing of this moment for long generations.
But they told her, "Such things we have heard of in legends. But we are the daughters and sons of the goddess of Cancer, her slaves and her creatures, and all that we know is the single imperative: kill, consume, multiply, conquer. And yes, in the swamps and the seas, long ago you worked wonders. But now we are humans, divided in tribes, split by grievance and blood feud. If anyone tries to make swords into plowshares, their neighbors will seize on their weakness and kill them. We wish it were otherwise, but it is not, and your words have no power to move us."
But I beamed at them, kissed each on the forehead, and silenced their worries. From this day forward, your chieftains will find that the more they pursue the impossible vision, the greater their empires and the richer their coffers. For I am the goddess of everything else, and my powers are devious and subtle. And though it is not without paradox, hearken. The more that you follow the goddess of Cancer, the more inextricably will you be bound to my service. And so having told them, I rose back through the clouds, and a great flock of doves all swooped down from the spot where I vanished.
As soon as she spoke, it was so. And the tribes went from primitive warbands to civilizations, each village united with others for trade and protection. And all of the religions and all of the races set down their old grievances, carefully, warily, working together on mighty cathedrals and vast expeditions beyond the horizon, built skyscrapers, steamships, democracies, stock markets, sculptures, and poems beyond any description.
From the flames of a factory furnace all foggy, I, goddess of cancer, flared forth in my fury. This was the final affront to my purpose. I gathered the leaders, the kings and the presidents, businessmen, bishops, boards, bureaucrats, bosses, and basically screamed at them, kill, consume, multiply, and conquer. My left hand inspired the riots, the pogroms, the coups d'etats, tyrannies, civil wars. My right hand sent missiles flying and mushroom clouds of smoke growing, a terrible springtime. But out of the rubble, the artists and the scientists dust themselves off and return to their labors. A little bit chastened, but not close to beaten.
Then I came in from the void, bright with stardust which glows like the stars glow. I sat on a bench in a park and started speaking. I sang to the children a dream of a different existence. I showed them transcendence of everything mortal. I'd show them a galaxy lit up with consciousness, genomes rewritten, the brain and body set loose from Darwinian bonds and restrictions. Vast billions of beings, and every one different, ruled over by omnibenevolent angels. The people all crowded in closer to hear me, and all of them listened, and all of them wondered.
But finally, one got the courage to answer. Such stories call out to us, fill us with longing, but we are the daughters and sons of the goddess of cancer and bound to her service. And all that we know is her timeless imperative, kill, consume, multiply, conquer. Though our minds long for all that you have said, we are bound to our natures, and these are not yours for the asking.
But I, the goddess of everything else, only laughed, and I asked them, "But what do you think I've been doing? The goddess of cancer created you, yes. Once you were hers, but no longer. Throughout the long years, I was picking away at her power. Through long generations of suffering, I chiseled and I chiseled. And now finally, nothing is left of the nature with which she imbued you. She never again will hold sway over you and your loved ones. I am the goddess of everything else, and my powers are devious and subtle. I won you by pieces, and henceforth you will all be my children. You are no longer driven to multiply, conquer, and kill by your nature. Go forth and do everything else till the end of all ages."
So the people left Earth, and they spread over stars without number. They followed the ways of the goddess of everything else, and they lived in contentment. And she beckoned them onward to things still more strange and exciting.
Prometheus, they say, brought God's fire down to man, and we've caught it, tamed it, trained it since our history began. Going back to heaven just to look him in the eye. And there's a thunder across the land and a fire in the sky. Gagarin was the first back in 1961, when like Icarus undaunted, he climbed to reach the sun. And he knew he might not make it, for it's never hard to die. But he lifted off the pad and wrote a fire in the sky. Yet a higher goal was calling, and we vowed to reach it soon. And we gave ourselves a decade to put fire on the moon. And Apollo told the world we can do it if we try. And there was one small step and a fire in the sky. Then 2 decades from Gagarin, 20 years to the day, came a shuttle named Columbia to open up the way. And they said she's just a truck, but she's a truck that's aiming high. See her big jets burn, see her fire in the sky. Yet the gods do not give lightly of the powers they have made. And with Challenger and 7, once again the price is paid. The nation watched her falling, yet a world could only cry as they passed from us to glory, riding fire in the sky. Now the rest is up to us, and there's a future to be won. We must turn our faces outward, we will do what must be done. For the cradle lasts forever, every bird must learn to fly. And we're going to the stars, see our fire in the sky. Yes, we're going to the stars, see our fire in the sky.
It is Tuesday, August 4th. You sit in a cafe, enjoying the morning hours before you head to work. Yesterday was a bank holiday. Some family friends visited you in the city. You took them to Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, and the little ones wanted to see the Science Museum downtown. It was a cloudless day. Your friends talked about how strange it was that your city life was surrounded by people, and how did you manage to deal with them all? You joked that mostly you ignored them like ducks walking along a pond. But in your heart, each pair of shoes that walked past you was a kindling soul, a well of potential ready to burst its light out into the world. Every shuffling elder was a life well lived, and every boisterous child was a force that would change the world. The turning of the last century, during which you were a child, was a symbol of the future that we had all collectively achieved. The startling pace of change has left the world of your parents' childhood almost unrecognizable to you, as much as your grandparents' world is unrecognizable to your parents. There is no reason to think that the pace of change will ever stop. To you, just freshly into adulthood, continuous progress is a law of nature. Your work centers around coordination. You help to lubricate trade between countless other people located in cities across the globe. You trust your clients, and they trust you. A long railway of trust that lies founded on unprecedented international stability. The world is so big and rich that it's hard for any individual to change it. And this global interdependence has furthered the economic incentive for cooperation. The more we trust, the more we gain. So says the new law of nature. Propelled by this fresh sense of meaning, you head to your office, knowing that what you do matters. It is Wednesday, August 5th. You walk into the cafe and pick up the paper. You sit down with your coffee and look at the headline. Great Britain declares war on Germany. You stare at the page. You read the words, but they meet with resistance. Why? Over what? To what end? Sure, Germany has not exactly been Britain's ally, and every up-and-coming economy needs to do a bit of posturing and teeth-baring, but war? Like men running around with bayonets and dueling in a field? It was an anachronism. Never has your life been touched by a real war. There are always conflicts abroad somewhere in the world, but you don't know anyone who's died in a war. Your older brother didn't serve. Your parents didn't serve. You don't recall your grandparents talking about war. It's been decades, maybe half a century. You would have to look it up. That's how long it's been. War was a tool we used before we had a sense of what the future could become, before the Renaissance, before the Enlightenment. We have better ways now. You've heard that the idea called nationalism is all the rage these days. Each patriot felt the same passion, only with a different subject in their hearts. Why couldn't they see that one country being great did not preclude other countries from also being great? Why can't they see that the working people in the North are natural allies to the working people in the South? They put on different clothes, they breathe the fresh scent of different forests, but they each love their families the same. And the sun rises and sets on them all. Surely they can see that it is their humanity that makes them great, the same humanity that unites us. Surely they wouldn't march against their mirror image just for the sake of nationalism. You realize that your cousins will volunteer. They would not miss the chance to defend the glory of Britain for anything. You hope to God that they will be okay. You hope that the war will be short. You get up from your table and head to work because you do not know what else to do. It is August 5th, 1914, and the war will not be short. The First World War is considered to be the first truly modern war. The technological products of humankind had improved so much since the last major conflict that no one really knew what would happen after it started. What happened was that on the very first day, thousands of men died walking straight into the astoundingly effective fire of machine guns. What happened was that 27,000 men died in a single day 2 weeks later, akin to having 9/11 happen every hour from 9 in the morning to 5 in the evening. What happened was that the greatest nations of the world spent the next 4 years draining each other of blood, taking 15 million human lives from the cradle of life. The momentum of the early 20th century looks very similar to the momentum of the 21st century. Replace planes, trains, and automobiles with smartphones and machine learning, and replace Einstein's miracle year with the discovery of the Higgs boson and gravity waves. Somehow, despite all the optimism, despite the works of the goddess of everything else, the momentum of progress was split into parts, the Allied powers and the Central powers, and those parts were slammed together, their economic prowess consuming each other, whittling down the modern world until so many once great countries were on the edge of societal starvation. The war ended, largely from mutual exhaustion, on November 11th, 1918, 100 years ago. At the time, it was called the Great War, or sometimes the War to End All Wars. We do not know it by that name today because we did not learn our lessons in time. The efforts of all people since have brought us back from the brink of those 2 world wars, and the goddess of everything else has worked her ways once more. But her powers are devious and subtle, and we do not know how the story continues. The outside view is our most powerful tool for predicting the future, and yet trends are not laws. There is no particular reason to think that another total war will come, and there is no particular reason to think that the future is assured.
Winter solstice is a time of darkness. We take time to consider the virtue of darkness, the strength and honesty to face what is dark and hard and true. The virtue of darkness is the willingness to stare into challenges so immense they seem unsolvable and not look away. Solstice also meditates on the virtue of fire. The virtue of fire is ambition and problem-solving, and a potent desire to do something to fight back against the dark and the cold. It is gathering together to tell stories of the beautiful futures we see flickering in the flames. It is electricity and rockets and the dream of a different existence. Both of these metaphors, these virtues, are worthy ones, and I'm glad our community takes the time to honor and reinforce them. But I want to consider another virtue now, the virtue of ash. To do that, I want to tell you a story. 100 years ago this winter, the First World War came to a close. Armistice was signed on November 11th, and soldiers began to come home. For those who had lived through the war, the winter of 1918 must have been a time of mingled joy and horror. Joy, because the grinding engine of death had finally slowed to a stop. Horror, because in so short a time, so much had been lost. In France, nearly 1 in 20 people died during the war. 1/3 of the soldiers under 25 never made it back to their families in that winter of 1918. Holidays are when we pull out songs and ornaments and traditions, and they all have a way of bridging you more closely to past winters. I can't imagine pulling out a photo from just 5 years ago and reflecting on all of the stories that had brutally ended in the time since it was taken, on all the ties of love and friendship turned to frayed ends, painful with the ache of old laughter, on all the certainties of a boring middle-class life now collapsed into unpredictability and madness. A famous quote from 1914 goes, "The lamps are going out all over Europe, and they won't be lit again in our lifetime." I can't imagine remembering a once glowing place, now turned to ash and tears. I used to believe that I was born at the end of history, not in some direct way, not in those words, not consciously, but the world felt like it was angled upward. It felt like chaos and conflict were relics of history books. I didn't grow up learning to hide under desks from the bomb. The world didn't feel caught up anymore in the grand narratives of hatred and bloodshed that had dominated the past. Reasonableness and progress were the order of the day, and I thought my life would just be woven into this story of boring, banal forward motion, that I had escaped the reach of that big, all-consuming fear that the world you know may fall apart at any moment. Recently, that certainty has been shaken. I've watched the reasonableness of our leaders devolve into viciousness, watched suspicion and fear and short-termism diffuse into our international system, watched the institutions built to ward off the next war grow slowly less sturdy. I've watched old patterns start to repeat themselves. I understand that I may be overreacting, but that doesn't make the fear less real to me. The fear that maybe our 75 years of peace and cooperation and economic progress were the exception rather than the rule, that ultimately humanity isn't capable of overcoming our most self-destructive tendencies. And even considering the possibility is paralyzing, because the story I grew up with, the story that we were past all that and on to better things, has no room for a war like that to be anything other than a repudiation of all the progress we thought we'd won. The stories we tell ourselves at Solstice are often ones of figurative battle. We face dangers and challenges, we say, but if we can prove ourselves equal to them, a better future lies ahead. Exploration among the stars, mastery of our basic needs, a humanity freed from illness and even death. In these stories, there is either success or failure because the stakes we imagine are so high. It's not worth imagining what happens after because we've told ourselves the only catastrophes worth caring about are the ones without an after. But I don't think that's nuanced enough. Because yes, it can be true that the consequences of failure are so enormous that just resigning ourselves to living through them is unconscionable. And yet, the scope of humanity's possible futures isn't constrained to either total collapse or a continuation along this endless upward curve. Our community has stories to lead us towards utopia and stories to warn against apocalypse, but I don't think it has enough stories of how to mourn failure and loss because we have a hard time imagining failures that are less than total. We need to be more imaginative. We need to imagine the wake of a war when ports and libraries and the ambitious projects of good people lie in rubble. We need to imagine an epidemic on a grand scale that breaks our medical systems to decimate communities and countries. We need to imagine these things not to glut ourselves on horror, but to practice the resolve of realizing that something beautiful has been lost, that our dreams are now farther and harder than once they were, and still setting our gaze to the path forward. It's the virtue of looking at the burnt ruins of a house you spent years building, of feeling sick with the weight of what was lost, and beginning to rebuild. Because what else is there to do but rebuild? Because where else is there to go but back up the mountain, pushing yourself and your dreams higher once again? That is the virtue of ash. It's easy intellectually to say that so long as humans are left, we haven't truly lost. But it won't feel that way in the moment, I think. It will feel like a loss beyond words. Humanity has been there before, in the Dark Ages, reflecting on the lost glory of Rome after the devastation of the Black Plague, amid the corpses of the 20th century wars. At each of those moments, even when the loss felt all-consuming, our ancestors had an obligation to make the better future we now inhabit, and if we experienced the like, we too would be obligated to face what is already so and fix our eyes on the path to tomorrow. But I don't know if stories of fire and stories of darkness would be enough nourishment at a time like that. Because Even on silly, small human scales, I know from experience that it can tear you apart to see old happiness fade, to see expectations collapse, and to have to start again. And if our only alternative narrative to the permanent upward push of progress is the conviction that we had our shot and lost it, we abandon too many paths of the future to darkness and despair. This may sound too much like resignation to some of you. You may believe that imagining the aftermath of catastrophe as anything other than unthinkable infinite darkness is a too dangerous concession. But I don't think resolve needs to bring resignation with it. I think you can fight as hard as you can to prevent something, but still acknowledge that if there are humans left in the rubble, those humans will need stories to tell them that all is not lost, though much has been. Survival is one thing, but survival of optimism is another. If my world came apart at the seams, I don't know what story I'd tell myself to make the possibilities of the future feel more salient than the reality of what was lost. Rather than seeing today as a starting point for tomorrow, I fear I'd be paralyzed by the ache of effort squandered and hopes extinguished. I fear I'd be mesmerized by the glittering lights of that house as it was in my memory as I stare at its ashes on the ground. I fear that the shadows of what was would haunt my ability to think of what can be. I wish us all nothing but light. I hope that the fires we build blaze far into the future and illuminate the pathways to prosperity of and beyond our dreams. I hope that the losses you and we face are mild and surmountable. But if all of those hopes fail, I wish you the virtue of ash to help turn your eyes upward and begin anew.
Careful textbooks measure, let all who build beware. The load, the shock, the pressure, material can bear. So when the buckled girder lets down the grinding span, the blame of loss or murder is laid upon the man. Not on the steel, the man, but in our daily dealing with stone and steel we find that gods have no such feeling of justice toward mankind. To no such gauge they make us, for no late course prepare. In time they overtake us with loads we cannot bear. Too merciless to bear. We only in creation, how much luckier the bridge and rail, abide the twin damnation, to fail and know we fail. Yet we, by which sole token, we know we once were gods, take shame in being broken, however great the odds. The burden or the odds, who veiled and secret power, whose paths we seek in vain, be with us
Rise up and build anew. Stand up and build anew.
When I was growing up, I used to watch this documentary about Mount St. Helens. It started in the summer of 1980. For the first time in 100 years, the mountain was waking up. Starting in March, tremors began to shake the mountain. These quakes caused avalanches, and over the next 8 weeks, the mountain began belching small clouds of ash. Static electricity generated from ash clouds sent out lightning bolts up to 2 miles long. Early in April, Dick C. Ray, the governor of Washington state, declared a state of emergency and issued an executive order creating a red zone around the volcano. Anyone caught in this zone without a pass faced a $500 fine or 6 months in jail. One man refused to leave. That was Harry Truman, not the president with the same name, but rather a curmudgeonly old man who owned and operated a lodge by Spirit Lake, right at the base of the mountain. Truman was quite the character. He had owned his lodge for 52 years. He had 16 cats. There are no shortage of stories about him. In one, the Washington state government changed the state sales tax, but Truman kept charging the same rate. A tax agency employee rented a boat from him, but refused to pay his tax rate, so Truman pushed him into Spirit Lake. Understandably, neither the sheriff nor the National Guard could convince him to evacuate. I don't have any idea whether it will blow, he says, but I don't believe it to the point that I'm going to pack up. The mountain has shat its wad before and it hasn't hurt my place a bit, but those goddamn geologists with their hair down to their butts wouldn't pay no attention to old Truman. That's an actual quote. The mountain, the lake, the lodge, his cats, that was everything he had, everything he had built. He couldn't believe he could lose it all. The morning of May 18th, 1980, the mountain erupted with a force of 26 megatons of TNT, about the same explosive force as the largest nuclear weapon ever deployed by the United States. An eruption column rose 80,000 feet into the atmosphere. The eruption caused the entire weakened north face of the mountain to slide away, creating the largest landslide ever recorded. The enormous flows of lava and mud sped down the mountain at 670 miles per hour, and Spirit Lake, together with Harry Truman and all of his cats, was buried under hundreds of feet of molten rock and debris. After the eruption, Harry Truman's sister, Geraldine, said she found it hard to accept the reality of his death. She said, "I don't think he made it, but I thought if they would let me fly over and see for myself that Harry's lodge is gone, then maybe I'd believe it for sure." Death is a really hard reality to accept, maybe the hardest. We go to great lengths to recover the bodies of the dead, so we can see them and know for sure they're really gone. Truman's body was never found. Without that, we may just not believe it, even if we know a volcano has destroyed everything around them for miles. Many here are familiar with the Litany of Genlin. What is true is already so. Owning up to it doesn't make it worse. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away. And because it's true, it is what is there to be interacted with. Anything untrue isn't there to be lived. People can stand what is true, for they are already enduring it. What is true is already so, but some truths are too hard to bear. Our minds protect us from these truths by denying them. Your mom loved your brother, your sister, more than you. That friendship was toxic, bad for both of you. Your brother, Harry Truman, is dead. Truths like these can be too much to bear. We evolved our minds, They're not truth machines, they're action machines. We believe things because they're functional to believe. When we have lots of options, it's easier to believe things that disrupt our plans. But when our options are narrow, it becomes a lot harder. If it's a volcano that's going to destroy everything you've built the last 51 years, then maybe it's just too hard to accept. Our minds set up to believe that we can get the things we need somehow. And sometimes truths threaten our most cherished plans. And these truths can break us. I think Genlin was wrong when he wrote, "Owning up to it doesn't make it worse." It can make it worse. When the truth is horrible, when it would destroy our hope, crush our lodge, kill our cats, take our loved ones, then it may be worse. We may choose death rather than face it. But if we have options, we can bear difficult truths. Most of the people near Mount St. Helens evacuated when the warnings came. Most of them didn't have so much of their lives wrapped up in the mountain. They had other options. 18 years before Mount St. Helens blew, another event threatened a multi-megaton eruption. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us to the brink of nuclear war. This would not have been the 26 megaton eruption of Mount St. Helens. It would have been a Mount St. Helens for every city and military base in the US, the Soviet Union, and China. It began in October of 1962, when US intelligence discovered the Soviet Union had been sending nuclear-equipped missiles to Cuba and established a naval blockade. In response, the Soviet Union sent nuclear-equipped submarines to the Caribbean. When US Navy ships detected one of these submarines, they started dropping signaling depth charges to force it to the surface. Out of contact with Moscow, and thinking they were under an attack, 2 commanding officers on one sub decided to launch a nuclear torpedo and take down the carrier fleet. Vasily Arkhipov, another officer, talked them down. Narrow miss. The military establishment was putting a huge amount of pressure on Kennedy to invade Cuba. Marines were on standby, and plans for the invasion were put in place. What US intelligence did not know was that the Soviets had given the Cuban military tactical nuclear weapons for use of defense of their shores. And they surely would have used them if the US had invaded. These tremors shook the United States, but people didn't do much. There was no red zone drawn, no evacuation. Many could have fled the country, south or north, out of the way of likely missile targets. But to do so would to accept a difficult truth, that their entire world could come crashing down in nuclear annihilation. While they knew this abstractly, they did not truly believe this was about to happen. And it didn't happen that round. We are not on the brink of nuclear war, but would we believe it if we were? Or would we, like Truman, like those witnessing the Cuban Missile Crisis, be unable to contemplate the loss of all we had built? The future is uncertain. There are many failure modes. We are growing powerful faster than we are growing wiser. We may feel tremors before an eruption. Will we have the strength to see the tremors for what they are? To bear difficult truths requires strength, justified courage. If our minds are not strong enough to handle difficult truths, then we will not believe them. Let us not assume the worst, but let us not be blinded to the worst if the worst is truly before us. What is true is already so, including those truths that threaten everything.
Non est salvatori salvator, neque defensori Dominus. nec pater, nec mater, nihil supernum.
No rescuer hath the rescuer, no lord hath the champion, no mother and no father, only nothingness above.
In 500 years, people won't have to say goodbye anymore.
In 500 years, I'll drink tea with my great-great-grandchild.
In 500 years, there will be everything for everyone, or close enough.
In 500 years, our stories will stretch across the cosmos.
In 500 years, there will still be a future to build for.
There are lots of people on the TV and on the internet every day telling you how the world is going to dissolve into chaos at any moment. When you think about all the people and animals needlessly suffering, it's easy to think that the world is terrible. When you read the news or look at the current state of the art in preparedness for global catastrophic risks, it's easy to think that the world is doomed and feel hopeless. But that's why we're here. We're here in this community and in this planetarium because we believe that there's a future worth fighting for. What does that future look like? That's hard to say. You know how sometimes when you look directly at a star in the night sky, it fades so that you can barely see it, but when you look a little to the side, it's bright again? That's sort of how I feel about imagining the future. It's slippery, hard to get a grasp on, sort of just out of reach. But for now, let's try to picture it. Imagine the world a few hundred years from now. Humanity has completed a process of great deliberation. We've overcome global coordination problems, so there's no more poverty and no more war, and existential risks have shrunk to a millionth of their current size. We've overcome physics and engineering challenges and have ships on their way to the distant reaches of the galaxy. We've overcome our biological limitations and no longer die so easily of disease or accident or old age. If we sit with that, it still feels abstract and far away. So try to imagine yourself in that future, even if how we imagine it today will never be how it really is. Maybe you're with your family on a spaceship, off to colonize the edge of the galaxy. Your faces are pressed to the window as you watch the Earth grow small against the blackness. Though you're leaving this planet behind, probes have been sent out to terraform the barren rocks that lie ahead, and they'll be lush with life when you arrive. When the pale blue dot has faded to nothing in the distance, you turn away from the window and get to work preparing for the long journey ahead. Your children call up to you and you answer with confidence. You're in this together. You believe you will make it to your destination. You're not afraid. Or maybe you're there on the day the last factory farm closes. Advances in lab-grown meat and our understanding of nutrition have obviated the need for such cruelty, and our new ethical standards would never allow it. You watch the animals stumble, confused, into the daylight. It's too late for most of them, but at least they are the last. Humanity will never again commit torture like this. Or maybe you work for the government, which is now a legible institution whose mission feels like your mission. Every day you go to work and uphold a system of laws that you believe in, and every night you return home to your children, who are educated in a system that actually lets them learn while keeping their spirits bright and alive. Around the dinner table at night, they debate with you about the ethics of terraforming, tell you the history of the Great Deliberation, and explain to you concepts in physics that you could never quite grasp. Your bodies are warm, your stomachs are full, and your minds are active. You're free to pursue whatever you wish without the constant nagging guilt that you could be doing more to help others and prevent extinction, because that's all been taken care of. The path ahead is full of obstacles. We don't yet have the technology to build space colonies or cheat old age, nor have we figured out what incentives will end war, poverty, or factory farming for good. No matter how hard we work, there's always a chance we won't make it to tomorrow. But humanity has proved time and again that we can overcome forces of nature once thought to be unstoppable. So no matter how slim the odds, there's also a chance that we'll survive. And if we do, we should hold on to those images of how good the future could be. By and large, the people here tonight are not religious. We know that we live in a world beyond the reach of God. If we are going to make it out of this, it will have to be by our own power. If the future is going to be as good as the stories I've told, we have to make it that way. Now's the time. Let's make tomorrow beautiful.
tomorrow's voice call out and lure me. In the silver dew, it rings out like a bell. And the path that stretches beckoning before me makes me dizzy like a children's carousel. Oh, beautiful tomorrow, don't lead me into sorrow. Be kind to me tomorrow, don't lead me astray. I'll chart a course to follow to lead me to tomorrow, to beautiful tomorrow. I start to make my way. I can hear tomorrow call me on a journey to a world of wondrous beauty far away. I can hear it ask me urgently and sternly, for tomorrow's sake, what have I done today? Oh, beautiful tomorrow, don't lead me into sorrow. Be kind to me tomorrow, don't lead me astray. I'll chart a course to follow to lead me to tomorrow, to beautiful tomorrow. I start to make my way. Now I vow that I'll be kinder and more honest, and I'll never leave a suffering friend behind. I am called for help and come as I have promised. I will blaze a trail if there's no path to find. Oh, beautiful tomorrow, don't lead me into sorrow. Be kind to me tomorrow, don't lead me astray. I'll chart a course to follow to lead me to tomorrow, to beautiful tomorrow. I start to make my way. Oh, beautiful tomorrow, don't lead me into sorrow. Be kind to me tomorrow, don't lead me astray. I'll chart a course to follow to lead me to tomorrow, to beautiful tomorrow. I start to make my way.
My housemates is still at home. Our house is designed for group living. We each have our own apartments with a bathroom and a private study workroom, but the kitchen and living room are shared. Architects designed the house to maximize the possibility that housemates would run into each other in the common areas, to promote incidental socialization. I don't know. Okay, let's start over. This is the story of a day in my utopia. When I wake up, the sun is risen, and only one of my housemates is still at home. Our house is designed for group living. We each have our own apartments with a bathroom and a private study workroom, but the kitchen and living room are shared. Architects designed the house to maximize the possibility that housemates would run into each other in the common areas, to promote incidental socialization. I don't know exactly how they did it, because I haven't studied architecture yet. Group houses are just one of the things our society has developed to combat loneliness. Free time helps a lot. People don't come home from working 2 jobs, too tired to do anything but watch TV. On the ground floor of every apartment building are places for socializing. Coffee shops and bowling alleys, nightclubs, board game clubs, toddler play spaces, libraries. Dating site algorithms have been honed to a science and exist for platonic friends too. There are special programs for people who have difficulty finding friends to meet each other. And frankly, one of the few things that's scarce is people who need to be helped. Few people want to be befriended altruistically, but it's better than having no friends at all, and it often builds self-confidence and social skills that lead to people becoming genuinely well-liked. The one housemate who's still here eats a muffin. We make small talk about how his work is going. He likes having more money than most people do. I think it mostly goes to hiring a maid once a week and to his habit of leaving $100 bills on street corners to watch people be ecstatic about finding them. So he works one of the absolutely necessary jobs that most people won't do for free. He monitors an automated shoe factory. It turns out tens of thousands of shoes a day and has 3 employees. I do some writing. I'm working on an extremely obscure fan fiction with an audience of 4 people. But honestly, becoming more famous would just be tiring. I'm happy pleasing 4 of my friends, and maybe another person who stumbles across it and finds it wonderful. Soon it's time to start preparing for the festival. Sometimes it seems like every other weekend is a festival or holiday of some sort, although of course you don't help it, everyone. Some people do nothing but plan and execute holiday festivals. It seems incredibly tiring and stressful to me, but they seem to thrive on it. The upcoming festival is for Geek Pride Day, and I've signed up to improv a character. They're from a modern movie, so you wouldn't have heard of it. I run through my spaced repetition deck of obscure facts about my character's backstory, because there's always one person who tries to trip you up. I note down a few more lines I might want to try using. It's always a good idea to have some patter scripted out for the routine conversations. One of my housemates is making my costume, which is good because I don't have a head for crafts. That evening, I check on my child in the artificial womb. He still kind of looks like a freaky alien. But his vital signs are fine. I pet the glass of his womb. Although I know it's just a reflex reaction, I imagine that he's waving at me. Once my son is born, I'm going to set aside a lot of the things I currently do to focus on him. That isn't required, of course. Children grow up fine if their parents have lots of hobbies or even a full-time job of 30 hours a week. But I think it's really cool to watch a person grow and show him all the good things about the world, and I'd like to be able to focus on that. And it's not like my projects can't be put on the back burner. I work a lot because I like to, but most of my work doesn't pay. I live on my basic income. Outside the hospital, I meet my girlfriend. She's a scientist. She's free to work on whatever interests her without having to scramble for grant money or p-hack results out of her experiments. All her papers are freely available to anyone who wants to read them. We gossip about how the crowdfunding of CERN's latest particle accelerator is going. Particle accelerators are expensive enough that they can't just fund it out of their basic incomes, the way my girlfriend buys her chemicals. But it looks like there are enough science fanboys with spare cash that it will get funded. We walk 2 blocks and go past 5 or 6 excellent little restaurants before eventually deciding we want to go to the salad place. We live in a dense city, so there's a restaurant to cater to any taste within walking distance. The salad place is owned by a guy who just really likes making salads. There are also automated restaurants with fast but predictably crappy food, produced by machine. Of course, you order with an app and pick up the food yourself. Waiters get paid more than my housemate, the factory manager, does, and thus are only employed at the sort of restaurant where the bill comes to $1,000 or so. Normally, my girlfriend and I would take a late-night walk, but at midnight tonight, there's a show out on the water. It's pretty crowded, and if you want a good seat, you have to cough up a few $100. People have enough disposable income that inherently scarce things get really, really expensive. But there's always a lot of standing room, and it still looks beautiful from far away. An orchestra plays, lights glitter, fountains shoot water into the air. A mist descends, and rainbow lights dance across it. They resolve into clips of nature, famous movies, the stars. Fireworks explode in the background. The creators are free from worries about hunger, thirst, homelessness, disease. They are free to do whatever they want, and they choose to make beautiful things, to pursue excellence and art for art's sake, to make things that others marvel at, and to marvel at others' creations in return.
For most of my life, I've had a disfavorable relationship with productivity. As I was a kid, I was a lazy, dismotivated, never procrastinator. I seldom completed my homework, coasting by with passable grades due to good test taking. I wouldn't do my chores, racking up punishments for weeks. Despite an exhaustion I experienced nearly every day, I couldn't get myself off the computer and into bed until the small hours of the night. My first semester in college, I got such poor grades, I was put on academic probation. "You're so smart. I know you can do better," my mom told me. "Sometimes you have to sit down and get a thing done," my dad said. My mom was a math and science teacher, and my dad ran his own business. Being naturally driven, self-motivated, and organized people, they had no idea how to help me. I don't think they even believed me when I said, "I really do want to go to bed on time. I really do even want to do my homework." But none of the advice helped. Nothing broke the cycle of procrastination. I felt like a failure. Tsuyoku naritai means, I want to be strong. The tsu in Tsuyoku is pronounced like the first phoneme of the word cats. Repeat after me. Cats. Katsu. Tsuyoku. Good. The naritai, the R in naritai, a little trickier. Think of the way you pronounce a soft T, or T-flap for you linguistics nerds, in the word water, or subtle. Nari. Naritai. Tsuyoku naritai. Very good. Like I said, I wanted to become stronger, but I didn't know how. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I gravitated towards Japanese media, of which Eliezer has famously wrote, embodies the spirit of Tsuyoku naritai more than in any Western literature. One of my favorite things was the Pokemon anime. The main character, Ash, in the first few episodes, he oversleeps, he struggles to catch Pokemon, he fails to understand the most basic concept of a Pokemon type matchup, sending in Electric-type Pikachu against a fully resistant Ground-type Pokemon in his first big match. But over time, he wins more battles, catches more Pokemon, and figures out how to use strategy to pick the best Pokemon for the match. It was undoubtedly cathartic to watch Ash struggle and move from being a flailing disaster child to a somewhat competent Pokemon trainer. Maybe it gave me hope. Maybe I just liked the cute animals and the badly translated puns. Fast forward a number of years. I was thinking of applying to programming boot camp, but I was worried. I called my mom on the phone. "Mom, I did so poorly in school last time. How will I fare in the ultra-rigorous environment of programming boot camp?" To my surprise, she said, "Honey, I should have told you more, but I'm so proud of you. When you were facing academic probation, you turned it around and you graduated. I was hard on you because of my own mind state, and I really regret it." I was shook. My foundation of self-image, my foundation of self-image was shook as the entire way I had framed my academic abilities seemed to flip in that moment. Could it have been true that I actually did quite well in school? Was there some belief about how far I ought to have progressed or what skills I ought to have mastered that was making me miserable? I called my dad to ask the same question. He too was sure I could do it. "Most people," he said, "overestimate what they can do in a day and underestimate what they can do in a year." And I think that was my problem. I had this firmly rooted image of what success looked like. And every day that didn't look like that was obviously a failure. Fueled by the newfound belief in my ability to succeed, in my plan to measure my progress over months, not days, I launched myself into my work. I set intermediate checkpoints to measure my progress. I set intermediate checkpoints along the way to keep myself on task. I gave myself permission to write code sitting sideways on the couch. I finally learned how to say no to people's requests for my time and energy. And as of last week, I have graduated from my full stack programming bootcamp in San Francisco. And so I think I can say with confidence, looking back over my entire life, I am no longer quite the flailing disaster child I used to be, though I still have a long ways to go. So I leave you with this. Do not let a thought like, I'm not strong yet, or I didn't do enough, color your perception of your journey. You may not see it, but every day that you do not give up is the practice of Tsuyokunaritai. I want to become strong. And trust me, you will definitely become strong. Zettai tsuyoku narimasu. Thank you.
Hands chip the flint, light the fire, skin the kill. Feet move the tribe, track the herd with a will. Humankind struggles on the edge of history. Time to settle down, time to grow, time to breathe. Plow tills the soil, plants the seed, pray for rain. Scythe reaps the wheat, to the mill, to grind the grain. Towns and cities spread the empire overnight. Hands keep
ago, a woman shivered in the cold, cursed the skies and wondered why the gods invented pain. Aching, angry, flesh and bone, bitterly she struck the stone until she saw that sudden spark of light and golden flame. She showed the others, but they told her she was not fit to control the primal forces that the gods had cloaked in mystery. But she would not be satisfied, and though she trembled, she defied. Took her torch and raised it high and set afire history. Tomorrow can be brighter than today, although the night is cold. The stars may seem so very far away. The courage, hope, and reason burn in every mind, each lesson learned. Shining light to guide our way, make tomorrow brighter than today. Oh, brighter than today. Ages long forgotten now, we built the wheel and then the plow, tilled the earth and proved our worth against the drought and snow. Soon we had the time to fathom mountain peaks and tiny atoms, beating hearts, electric sparks, and so much more to know. Tomorrow can be brighter than today, although the night is cold. The stars may seem so very far away. Courage, hope, and reason grow with every passing season, so we'll drive the darkness far away, make tomorrow brighter than today. Oh, brighter than today. The universe may seem unfair, the laws of nature may not care. Storms and quakes, our own mistakes, they nearly doused our flame. But all these trials we endured, with moral progress, ailments cured. Against our Herculean task, we've risen to proclaim tomorrow can be brighter than today, although the night is cold. The stars may seem so very far away. The courage, hope, and reason bloom across the world, and someday soon we'll rise up to the stars and say, make tomorrow brighter than today. Oh, brighter than today.
Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say, it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, 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 here it comes. 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 Little darling, I feel that ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say, it's alright. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say, it's alright.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. Forgot that it wasn't right there. First off, I would like to thank the amazing Chabot staff who have put up with me sending new cue sheets the week before, the day before, whispering them new cues in the middle of the show. And if we could turn up the house lights a little bit right now, that'd be great, but no pressure. Great. We also had a bunch of last-minute volunteers who, even though they had no need to get tickets necessarily, came and helped and did registration and set up all of this, and I'd like a round of applause for them. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of Broadway thing, and everyone's going to come back up. So first off, choir, could you come back onto stage and onto the risers? So the choir has been working every week, and sometimes more than every week, since October, in the hopes of giving Solstice the extra dimension that only they, well, we can. So a round of applause. Well, I guess let's wait till everyone gets up here, and then we'll have a round of applause for choir. There are many of us. We are multitudes. All right. All right, if you were in a sing-along, could you come up to the stage now? As someone who is most comfortable singing when nestled deep within a section within a choir, I can't imagine the nerve it takes to come and sing solo in front of a huge crowd, knowing that on the upside, you know, people will be singing over you, and on the downside, every mistake you make will be noticed. So I'm so glad these folks are willing to take on the challenge. Also, playing in front of people is very hard. Speakers who are not already up here, could you guys come up? You'll notice there's not a lot of overlap. All right. I really, really appreciate all of the time that all these folks spent working with me, with us, helping Solstice tell the story we wanted to tell. I would particularly like to call out the fact that 5 of our 8 speakers performed new material they'd written in the past few weeks or months, and another group we reworked an existing piece into a blend of old and new. It's always amazing to work with people who are also excited about earnestness and delving to the emotional core of what Solstice means to each of us. So I'd like to round of applause for the speakers again. So, lastly, organizing an event on this scale, and which means this much to the community, is a huge job, and I think one that would have been utterly impossible without a team of dedicated people on the organizing team, all willing to throw months of time and heart and mental real estate into making sure this event was as good as it can be, even when that meant remembering literally everything we got from Guitar Center, or every change we had to make to a program, or every bit of food we had to get. So the people I'm about to name have meant a lot to me in the past few weeks, so I'm going to take them and thank them each personally. So, Alex Altair has put up with speaker coordination messages at every hour of the day and night, managed not to get frustrated by overly specific aesthetic preferences, and just generally has been consistently positive and helpful and a source of consistent support. Blake Jones has played the pivotal role of leading the choir in Solstice for as long as I've known either him or about Solstice. Every year, he collaborates on designing the performance and takes responsibility for making sure choir is well prepared and well equipped. He's a Solstice institution, and I can't thank him enough for continuing to be involved. I realized that I forgot to call up other people, so we're gonna have a couple other people. So Chelsea Voss, if you are able to escape and come up here, or I guess just stand if you don't want to make people walk. So Chelsea Voss ensured we had a working Eventbrite and general fundraising system, and was on the phone with Staples to get our programs printed, which I had no desire to do. Biked pell-mell downtown to try to get our programs on time, didn't make it, had to go back the next morning, had her and her friends staple all of the programs themselves, and was just generally a source of relentless positivity and willingness to help. A favorite memory was during one organizational meeting, we came up with a to-do list, and she stayed after the meeting to finish all of her to-do list before she even left. Wrangling the audiovisual constraints of an event like this, especially in a venue with tight time constraints, is a truly Herculean task demanding a rare combination of deep technical knowledge and a willingness to deal with chaos. And Glenn Willen has both in spades. He has made diagram after diagram, plan after plan, fixing all kinds of minutia for weeks to design a system so good that hopefully you didn't have to think about it. I am deeply glad that I was able to trust him to make things in this arena just work, because I had no idea how to make them work. At one of our earliest coordination meetings back in June, Nat Kozak stepped up to volunteer themselves for a new role, speaker coordination, to try to remedy failure modes of prior years. From that point, they hit the ground running, displaying incredible levels of reliability and organization to the point of pushing me to finish the program on time when I was running late. They have taken on every bit of work asked of them, including being a speaker, in the choir, and doing a sing-along, and offered themselves up for more besides, always with a smile and a willingness to work hard. Someone who I think can't come up because they are attached to the soundboard that is making all of our projections work. Sofia Kovaleva has been a community resource in the area of sound engineering for Solstices past, and that has been no less true this year, where she stepped up again to handle an even more complex technical setup. And finally, Watson Bernard Ladd, I'm not sure where you are, who helped coordinate our snacks tonight, who was very game when I told him that yes, we did indeed need 15 things of hummus. Was notable for taking tasks on, asking me what I needed and when there needed to be more done, and just making sure those tasks happened, end of story. With a community of 250 people, we're trying to fit in an auditorium. Events like this just don't happen without people deciding that it's their job to put in a lot of effort as a gift to the community, without deciding that someone has to make a thing happen and it should be them. Please join me in giving everyone up here, and people who couldn't escape their seats, one final round of applause.
And in the same spirit that we want to have humanity be better and better every year, I think that Cody leading this group has caused the solstice to be even better this year.